Somewhere, in a lab, there is a machine that has only ever seen pictures. Faces, streets, oceans, bowls of soup. It has never read a single word, and to it, words are not even a thing that exists. Somewhere else, built by different people, there is a second machine that has only ever read words. It has never seen a single image, and it has never once seen the colour blue. These two share nothing. Not their design, not their data, not one thread of experience, and they have never communicated, not once. And yet, when you open them both up and look at how each one has arranged the world inside itself, you find that they have drawn the same map, the same shape, as if they were both quietly copying from something neither of them can see. So what is it that two strangers, with nothing in common, keep finding out there in the dark? Get comfortable and settle in. If you have not subscribed yet, go ahead and subscribe so the next quiet night like this one finds its way to you. Stay with me, because that same shape is about to turn up in a distant galaxy, in a 2,000-year-old story about a cave, and before the end, somewhere much closer to home. Let's get into it. Part 1. Two machines that have never met. I want to start tonight with two machines, and the strange thing they have in common, because the strange thing they have in common is one of the quietest discoveries anyone has made about reality in about 2,400 years, and almost nobody is talking about it. It did not trend. There was no announcement, no headline, no argument on the internet. It arrived the way the least noticed important things always seem to arrive, as a plain academic paper with a dry title and a wall of graphs, and then it simply sat there. And I keep going back and forth, honestly, on whether I want it to be true, because if it is true, it changes the meaning of something you do every single moment of your life without ever thinking about it. It changes what it means to look at the world. So let me show you the two machines. Somewhere, in a lab, there is a system built out of mathematics that has only ever seen images, pictures, photographs of streets and faces and oceans and bowls of soup. It has never read a single word in its life. Words to this thing do not exist. It has no idea that language is even something that minds do. And somewhere else entirely, in a different lab built by different people, there is a second system that has only ever read text. Billions of words poured into it, one after another. It has never seen a single picture. To this one, the visual world simply is not there. It knows the word ocean. It has never seen blue. It knows the word red the way you know the name of a city you will never visit. These two systems were made by different people for different reasons, using completely different blueprints. They were fed completely different slices of the universe. One got only what the eye can catch, the other got only what the tongue can say, and they have never communicated, not once, not directly, not indirectly, not through any back channel. They do not know the other one exists. As far as either of them is concerned, it is the only mind in the world, working alone on its own private problem. And yet, if you open them both up, and I will explain in a minute what opening them up even means, and you look at how each one has quietly organized the world inside itself, you find something that should not be there. You find that they have drawn the same map, the same shape, as if they were both copying very carefully from something that neither of them can see and neither of them was ever shown. The researchers who noticed this did something I find almost cheeky. They did not reach for a modern explanation. They reached back, past 2,000 years of philosophy, past the entire modern history of science, all the way back to a man who died more than 2,300 years ago, and they named what they found after him. They called it the Platonic representation, after Plato. Because the thing these machines seem to be feeling their way toward is, more or less, the thing Plato insisted was real all along. The thing that almost everyone since has quietly assumed he got wrong. This whole video is about what that might mean. And I am going to tell you up front the way I always try to, because you deserve to know where I actually stand. I genuinely do not know whether the idea I'm about to walk you through is the most comforting thing I have ever covered on this channel, or the most quietly unsettling. There is no disaster in this one. Nothing is coming to get you. No machine wakes up and decides to end the world in your sleep. The unease here is a completely different flavour. It is not about the end of the world. It is about whether you have ever actually seen the world at all. So stay with me, because to get anywhere near that question, we have to start somewhere very modest. We have to start with a graph so boring that you would scroll straight past it without slowing down. A little line on a chart, the kind of thing that puts people to sleep in the wrong way. and by the end of tonight, I want that boring little line to be one of the most disturbing things you have looked at all week. Not because it is loud, because it is quiet, and it will not leave you alone. Let me give you the source first, because I try to build every one of these around one real piece of work, something you could go and read yourself, something you could check, so that you never have to just take my word for it. This one is anchored to a paper. It came out in the year 2024. It is called, plainly, the Platonic Representation Hypothesis. The authors are 4 researchers named Minyoung Hu, Brian Chung, Tongzhou Wang, and Philip Isola, and they work at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Isola runs a lab that studies exactly this question, the question of how machines build internal pictures of the world, and the paper was presented at a conference called the International Conference on Machine Learning, which is, roughly speaking, one of the 2 or 3 most serious rooms in the entire world for this kind of research. I want to be careful about what kind of document this is because it matters. This is not a blog post. This is not somebody's hot take on the internet. It is what is called a position paper, and a position paper is a specific and rather brave genre. It is not reporting a single experiment with a single tidy result. It is a group of careful people standing up in front of a room full of their sharpest peers and saying, "Here is a pattern we think is real. Here is our evidence. Here is what we think it means. Now argue with us." And people did argue with them. We will get to the best argument against them later, and I promise I will give it its full weight, because if I only show you the side that makes my jaw drop, I am not respecting you, and I am not respecting the thing itself. Now let me tell you my honest relationship to this paper, because it is part of the story. I found it the way I find most things, which is that somebody mentioned it in passing, almost as an afterthought. I went to read it expecting to skim it, expecting a neat little technical curiosity I could file away and forget. And then I did not sleep quite right for about a week. It is, in places, a frustrating read, and not because the authors write badly. They are actually clearer than most. It is frustrating because the central claim keeps sliding between 2 sizes. One moment it sounds like a small, modest engineering observation, the kind of thing where you nod and think, "Huh, neat," and move on. And the next moment, if you let yourself actually feel what it is saying, the floor tilts under you. I kept having to stop and ask myself the same question. Wait, are they saying the small thing or the enormous thing? And I think the honest answer is that they are saying the small thing, very carefully, on purpose, because they are scientists and the enormous thing is not something you're allowed to say out loud in a room like that without a mountain of evidence. But the enormous thing is sitting right there underneath the small one the entire time, breathing. So here is the deal I'm going to make with you tonight, and I'm going to hold to it all the way through. I'm going to keep 1 foot planted on the modest claim, the part that is solid and measured and survived peer review, and the other foot I'm going to let wander out over the edge, out toward the enormous thing, the part that made me put the laptop down, and at every step I will tell you which foot I am standing on. When we are on solid ground, I will say so. When I have stepped out over the drop, I will say that too. That way you always know exactly how much weight to put on anything I tell you. To do this properly, I am going to need 3 other people in the room with us, 3 thinkers spread across roughly 24 centuries, and each one is going to walk back on stage exactly when we need them. There is Plato, obviously, and one particular story he told, the story about the cave, the one you had to read in school and probably half forgot. There is a physicist named Eugene Wigner, who in the year 1960 wrote a short essay with a title that has haunted scientists ever since. And there is a physicist named Max Tegmark, whose claim about the universe is so audacious that most people assume it must be a joke, right up until they realize he means it completely, literally, without a wink. Hold on to those 3 names, Plato, Wigner, Tegmark. They are going to come back one at a time, right when the ground gets interesting. But before any of them, we have to do the unglamorous part. We have to open up one of these machines and look inside and understand what it actually is that these 2 strangers, these 2 minds that have never met, both somehow drew the same picture of. Because until you understand what is really in there, the boring little graph is just a line, and I need it to be more than a line. Part 2. The Room with No Walls. Here is the thing you have to understand about what one of these machines actually is on the inside, and I am going to keep it concrete, because the whole video collapses if this part stays abstract. When one of these systems learns, it is not memorizing answers. It is not building a giant list of facts and looking things up. It is building a space, And I want you to picture that space, even though the picture is going to be a little bit impossible, because holding the feeling of it is enough. Imagine an enormous room. Not a three-dimensional room like the one you're sitting in right now, with a floor and a ceiling and 4 walls. Imagine a room with hundreds of dimensions, thousands of them, directions you could move in that are not left, not right, not up, not down, but something else, over and over again, hundreds of new directions all at once. You cannot actually picture that, and neither can I, because we were built by a world with 3 directions and our minds simply run out of room. So do not try to see it. Just hold the feeling of a space that is much, much larger and freer than anything you can stand inside. Now, inside that enormous space, the machine places everything it knows as a single point. A cat is a point sitting somewhere in the room. A dog is a point sitting somewhere else. A photograph of a sunset is a point. The word justice, if it is a language machine, is a point. Every single thing it has ever learned about becomes one location floating in that huge space. And here is where the whole trick lives, the entire intelligence of the thing. It is not in the points themselves, it is in where the machine puts them relative to each other. Cat and dog end up close together in that room. Not because anyone told the machine that cats and dogs are similar, but because in everything it saw they behaved similarly. They showed up in the same kinds of places. They were surrounded by the same kinds of things. Leashes and couches and food bowls and backyards. So the machine, quietly, on its own, slides them near each other. And cat and helicopter end up very far apart, on opposite sides of the room, because nothing about how they appear in the world ever brought them together. So the meaning, for one of these machines, is never in any single point. The meaning is in the distances. It is in the shape of the whole arrangement. Which things are near which other things, which things are far, what sits between them. The entire understanding the machine has of the world is really just this, a giant silent constellation of points, arranged so that closeness means similarity and distance means difference. And that arrangement has a name in the field. They call it a representation. It is the machine's private internal map of how everything relates to everything else. It is the closest thing the machine has to a picture of reality. Now sit with that word for a second. A map. Because a map is exactly the right way to think about it, and it is going to carry us all the way to the end of tonight. Your understanding of your own city is a kind of map like this. You know that the coffee shop is near the bookstore, that the river is far from the airport, that this neighborhood sits between those two. You do not carry the actual city around in your head. You carry the relationships, the distances, the shape of how things sit together. That is a representation too. You have one. You're using it right now to make sense of these words, placing each one near the ones it belongs with. And the strange power of arranging things this way is that relationships start to fall out of the map on their own, without anyone putting them there. If you have placed all your points well, then the direction you travel to get from the point for king to the point for queen turns out to be the same direction you travel to get from man to woman. The map has quietly learned what the difference between those pairs is, not because it was told, but because that difference is a real regularity in how the words are used, and a good map cannot help but capture it. The relationship between things becomes a direction you can move in, and that is the sense in which these machines are not storing facts at all. They are storing a shape, and the shape does the knowing. When one of them answers a question, it is not looking anything up. It is reading a location off its own map, the way you know, without checking, that a whisper is closer to a shout than a shout is to a smell. And here is the intuition you would have about the machines, the obvious one, the one I had, the one almost everyone has the first time they think about it. If you train 2 different machines on 2 different piles of data, with 2 different designs built by 2 different teams, you would expect them to build 2 different rooms, 2 different maps. Why on earth would they build the same one? They saw different things. They were made differently. Your mental map of your hometown and a stranger's mental map of theirs are completely different maps, because you walked different streets, you had different lives, you were shaped by different inputs. That is not surprising. That is just common sense. Different minds, different worlds, different maps. Of course. That common sense is exactly what this paper breaks. And I want you to notice how reasonable the common sense is, because that is what makes the breaking of it land. There is nothing foolish about expecting 2 separately built machines to disagree. It is the safe bet. It is the boring, sensible prediction that any careful person would make. And it turns out to be wrong. Because before I show you how wrong it is, I have to show you how they even measured it. And this is the part that is quietly brilliant. the part that turns a vague philosophical worry into a hard number you can actually put on a graph. Because you might reasonably ask, how do you even compare two of these rooms? One machine's space has a certain number of dimensions laid out in a certain way. The other machine's space has a different number of dimensions laid out completely differently. You cannot just lay one over the other because they do not even have the same shape. It would be like trying to lay a map drawn on a globe flat on top of a map drawn on a bedsheet. The grids do not line up. There is no obvious way to slide one onto the other and check whether they match. So the researchers did not try to line up the rooms directly. They did something cleverer. They asked a question about neighbours. Here is how it works. You pick a handful of things, say a dog, an apple, a car, and you go into the first machine's room and you ask it a simple question. What lives nearest to dog? Who are its closest neighbours in your space? And maybe the machine answers, cat, wolf, puppy, fine. Then you walk over to the second machine, a completely separate mind, built by different people, and you ask it the exact same question. In your room, who lives nearest to dog? Who are its closest neighbours? And now you have a test. Because if these two machines really did build genuinely different worlds, the neighbours should be different, maybe even random. The first one says the dog's closest friends are cat and wolf and puppy, and the second one says the dog's closest friends are, I do not know, telephone and cloud and Tuesday. If that happens, the maps are unrelated and the common sense wins and there is no video. But if the two machines have built the same world, then the neighbours will match. The dog will have the same friends in both rooms, and you do not just do this for the dog. You do it across thousands of things, thousands of items, and you count up how often the neighbours agree, and out of all that counting you get a single number. One number that answers a question people have only ever been able to argue about with words. How much do these two separate minds, these two strangers, actually agree about the shape of the world? And I want you to feel how quietly enormous that is, because it is easy to skate past. For all of human history, the question of whether two minds see the world the same way has been a thing you could only ever discuss, debate, wonder about over a drink. You could never measure it, because you could never get inside another mind and lay its map next to yours. And now, for the first time with these machines, you can. You can open two minds up, lay their maps side by side, and put an actual number on how much they agree. The oldest kind of unanswerable question, the kind that only ever lived in conversation, suddenly has a ruler held up against it. So we have our two machines, we have our giant rooms full of points, and we have a way to measure, with a real number, how much any two of those rooms line up. Everything is in place now. All that is left is to actually run the measurement across a whole crowd of these machines, big ones and small ones and clever ones and simple ones, and see what the number does. And that is where the boring little graph comes in, the one I promised you, the one that is going to stop being boring in about a minute, and I suspect never quite go back to being boring again. Part 3. The line that should not climb. So here is the boring graph, and I am going to build it for you one axis at a time, slowly, because the whole thing lives in the shape of a single line. Picture a simple chart. Along the bottom, running left to right, you put how good a machine is, how capable, how well it performs at the things these systems are asked to do. On the left end, the weak ones, the small and clumsy ones. On the right end, the strong ones, the large and capable ones. That is the bottom of the graph. Simple enough. Better machines to the right. And then, going up the side, from bottom to top, you put that agreement number, the one we just built. How much a given machine's inner map lines up with the maps of all the other machines. Down at the bottom, near 0, that would mean a machine is off on its own, drawing a private world that agrees with nobody. Up at the top, that would mean a machine's map matches everyone else's, that it has drawn the same world as all the others, so the height of a dot tells you how much that machine agrees with the crowd. Now what should you see if the world is the sane and tidy place that common sense promised us? You should see nothing, no pattern at all, just a scatter of dots, sprayed across the chart with no shape to them, every machine off doing its own idiosyncratic thing, some agreeing a little, some agreeing less, all of it random noise. Because remember, the sensible bet was that different machines build different maps, so the smart ones and the dumb ones alike should just be scattered, each in its own private world, a cloud of dots with no direction. That is what should be there. That is not what is there. What is there is a line, and the line climbs. As the machines get better, moving from left to right along the bottom, The dots climb higher and higher up the side. The more capable a machine becomes, the more its private inner map agrees with the private inner maps of all the other machines. The smarter the machine, the more it matches minds it has never met and was never shown. The better they get, the more they agree. I am going to say that again, slowly, because it is genuinely the whole video compressed into one sentence, and the first time I really understood it, that is the moment I had to put the laptop down and go stand in the kitchen for a while. As these machines get more capable, they do not get more individual, they get more identical. Generality, the thing we call being smart, is not pulling them apart into 1,000 unique perspectives. It is funneling them, all of them, toward one shape. Let me give you a moment to sit with that, because I think the reason it did not trend, the reason nobody made noise about it, is that it sounds technical, and it is not. It is about the most human thing there is. We tell ourselves a story about intelligence, do we not? We say that the smarter and more sophisticated a mind becomes, the more it develops its own way of seeing, its own style, its own private angle on the world. The genius in our story is the one who sees differently, the one whose perspective is so uniquely their own that no one else could have had it. We treat originality and intelligence as almost the same thing. These results quietly suggest the exact opposite. They suggest that getting smarter means becoming less unique, not more. That past a certain point, two great minds working on the same reality do not split apart into two visions. They fold together into one. The differences between them, all that private idiosyncrasy we prize, turn out to be the immaturity. The agreement is the destination. The smarter they get, the more they stop being themselves and start being the same. Let me make that visible, because a line on a chart is easy to nod at and hard to feel. So let me tell you about two map makers, and I want you to actually picture them, because this picture is going to come back at the very end of the night, carrying much more than it does now. Imagine two cartographers, two map makers, who will never meet, and who are each given the same job, map one particular stretch of coastline. The first one is a walker. He spends his entire life down on the shore itself, mapping the coast by walking it foot by foot, feeling the rocks under his boots, wading into the inlets, tracing the curve of every beach by hand. He has never once seen the coast from above. He does not even know what it looks like from the sky. He knows it only by touch, by the years of walking it. The second one is a flyer. She spends her entire life mapping the very same coastline from the air. Photographs from a great height, month after month, year after year. She has never set foot on the sand. She has never touched a single rock. She knows the coast only by sight, only from above, only as it appears from thousands of feet up. These two never speak. They never compare notes. They do not know the other one exists. One knows the coast only by touch, one only by sight, and they work their whole lives in complete isolation from each other. And then, at the very end, you take their two finished maps and you lay them side by side on a table, and the bays line up, the headlands line up, every jut and every hollow sits where the other map says it should, and the little hidden cove, the one that is almost impossible to find whether you're down on the ground or up in the air, the one you would only ever stumble on by accident, it is in the same spot on both maps, drawn by two people who never met, who used opposite methods, who shared nothing. Now, there are only two ways that happens. Only two. Either it is an astonishing coincidence, two strangers guessing their way into the same shape by pure luck, or the coastline is real. It is genuinely out there, one single coastline, and any honest way of mapping it, by touch, by sight, by walking or by flying or by anything at all, is going to arrive at the same shape, because the shape was already there before either mapmaker showed up. It was never the mapmakers who decided where the cove went. The cove was already there. They just found it. Before you decide, notice what the climbing line actually rules out, because ruling things out is where its strength lives. If only one machine agreed with the crowd, you could call it a copycat. If only the machines built by one company agreed, you could call it a house style, a shared recipe passed around a single building. If the agreement showed up only among the weak, clumsy machines, you could call it a beginner's mistake they would grow out of. But the pattern is the exact opposite of every one of those easy explanations. The agreement is strongest among the best machines, the ones built by different people in different places for different reasons. It grows as they improve. It shows up precisely where you would least expect copying and most expect originality. Whatever is pulling them together, it is not laziness, and it is not imitation, because laziness and imitation would fade as the machines got better, and this does the reverse. It gets stronger the smarter they get. That is the fingerprint of something real underneath, not something borrowed. And I want you to sit in that fork in the road, because that fork is the whole of tonight. Coincidence, or a real coast. And notice which answer is simpler. It is not the coincidence. Two strangers landing on the exact same secret cove by luck is a wild thing to believe. The simpler answer, the one that just quietly explains everything, is that the coast is real, and both of them found the same real thing. That is the moment this paper stopped being about machines, for me. Because those two map makers are the two machines, the one that only sees and the one that only reads, and they drew the same coast. And I want to press on the coincidence answer for a second, because people reach for it as if it were the safe, humble, skeptical choice, and I do not think it is any of those things. Imagine you actually met two map makers whose maps matched that precisely, down to the hidden cove, and they swore to you they had never met. Would you really conclude it was luck? You would not for a second. The odds of two people independently inventing the exact same complicated shape, jut for jut and hollow for hollow, are so small that you would laugh at them. The moment the match gets detailed enough, coincidence stops being the modest explanation and becomes the extraordinary one, the one that actually requires you to believe in something close to a miracle. And the maps these machines are drawing are not simple. They are enormous, intricate arrangements of thousands upon thousands of things, and they line up. So when someone tells you the convergence is probably just coincidence, gently notice what they are really asking you to believe. They are asking you to believe in a coincidence so large it would be, in its own way, more astonishing than the real coastline. The humble-sounding answer turns out to be the wild one. The wild-sounding answer, that the coast is simply there, is the humble one. But hold on, because I can already hear the sensible objection forming, and it is a good one, and I am not going to skip past it. You could say, fine, but these machines were all trained on human stuff. Internet pictures, internet writing, all scraped from the same world, all the same soup underneath. Of course they end up similar. They are all just chewing on the same meal, and that, honestly, is a fair thing to say. It is the first door anyone reaches for to make this feel ordinary again. So before we go anywhere near Plato, before I let myself step out over the edge, I want to walk over to that door, and I want to close it, and then I want to close the one behind it. Because it turns out there is more than one door, and every one of them, when you shut it, leaves you standing somewhere stranger than before. Part 4. One sees, one reads. The first door is the one I just named. All these machines were fed the same kind of thing, human words and human pictures pulled off the same internet, so naturally they end up in the same place. It sounds airtight. And to close it, I want to bring you all the way back to the two machines I opened with, the one that only sees and the one that only reads, because they are not just a nice image to start on. They are the hinge of this entire first half, and now is when they do their real work. A machine that only looks at pictures and a machine that only reads words do not merely have different data. They live in different universes of experience, and I mean that almost literally. The one that only sees has never, in its entire existence, had access to a single word. Language is not a thing that is dim or distant to it. Language is nothing. It has no concept that words even exist. And the one that only reads has never had access to a single image. It has never seen a shape, a colour, a face, a shadow. To it, the entire visual world is not there. Not hidden, not far away. Simply absent, the way a sound you have never heard is absent. So think about what these two actually share. In terms of raw sensory contact with the world, they share nothing. Nothing at all. It is the difference between a creature born with eyes and no ears, and a creature born with ears and no eyes, and the two of them raised in separate rooms that never connect. One of them knows the world only as things seen. The other knows it only as things said. There is no overlap. There is no common sense between them, no shared channel, not one thread of experience that runs through both. If any two minds should build different maps, it is these two. They do not even use the same kind of raw material to build with, and here is what the paper shows. As these two kinds of machines scale up, as they get bigger and better, their inner maps drift toward each other anyway. Let me make that as concrete as I can, because this is the part that should not be possible. Take the concept of a dog. The reading machine only ever met the dog as a word, as a pattern in language, a thing that shows up near leash and bark and loyal and bone, a knot of text with no shape and no colour and no fur. It built a location for dog in its room, based purely on how the word behaves among other words, and the seeing machine only ever met the dog as a picture, as a pattern of fur and 4 legs and a wet nose and a certain way of standing, a thing that appears near pictures of parks and pictures of children, with no name attached, no word, just the look of the thing. 2 completely different doorways into the same idea. One came in through language, one came in through vision. Neither of them ever used the door the other one used. And the better these machines get, the more they agree about exactly where the dog sits relative to everything else. The word dog, in the reading machine's map, ends up with the same neighbours, the same distances, the same local shape as the picture of a dog in the seeing machine's map. The geometry lines up. The 2 arrangements, built from raw materials that have nothing in common, quietly become the same arrangement. There is a way to feel how impossible this should be, and I want to give it to you, because the abstract version slides off the mind too easily. Imagine you have 2 people. One of them has been blind since birth and has only ever known the world through language, through careful descriptions read aloud, thousands of them, year after year. The other has been deaf and mute since birth and has never had a single word, and has only ever known the world through their eyes, through a lifetime of watching. Neither has ever had the sense the other relies on. Now sit them in separate rooms and ask each of them, in their own way, to arrange 1,000 things by how related they are. The one who lives in words arranges them by how the words behave. The one who lives in sight arranges them by how the things look, and when you compare the 2 arrangements, they match. The blind one, working purely from language, has put the same things next to each other that the deaf one put next to each other, working purely from sight. You would call that spooky. You would suspect they had somehow cheated, somehow compared notes. That is more or less what the machines are doing, except we know for a fact they never compared notes, because we built them, and we know exactly what went into each one, and that closes the first door hard. Because you cannot say any more that they agree because they were fed the same stuff. They were not fed the same stuff. They were fed as differently as it is possible to feed 2 minds. One got only what you can see, one got only what you can say, and they still met in the same place. So the meeting point, wherever it is not in the pictures, and it is not in the words. If it were in the pictures, the reading machine could never have found it, because it never saw a picture. If it were in the words, the seeing machine could never have found it, because it never read a word. The place where they meet has to be somewhere else, somewhere behind both doors, somewhere that both vision and language are each in their own way pointing at. Now, I said, I keep 1 foot on the solid claim and let the other wander out over the edge, so let me plant the solid foot for a second and be honest about the size of what we actually have so far. What has been measured is this: machines built differently, trained on different kinds of data, including data with no sensory overlap at all, grow more alike on the inside as they grow more capable. That is the solid part. That survived the room full of sharp peers. That is not me leaning out over anything. That is just what the number does when you run the measurement, but feel where even the solid part leaves you. Because the solid part alone is already strange. It already means that being good at understanding the world, whatever that turns out to mean, pushes a mind toward one particular way of arranging things, no matter what raw material it started from. It already means that the word and the picture are 2 roads to the same town. And once you have said that, you have said something that is not really about machines at all. You have said something about the town. You have said that there is a town, that there is a place both roads lead to, a there, a destination that exists independently of which road you took to reach it, and that, quietly, is the first place my other foot starts to slide off the edge. Because if the word and the picture both lead to the same arrangement, then that arrangement was, in some sense, waiting to be found. It was not invented by the seeing machine because the reading machine found it too and it never saw. It was not invented by the reading machine because the seeing machine found it too and it never read. It is starting to look less like something either of them made and more like something both of them discovered. And you do not discover things that are not there. You discover things that already were. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the kind of moment where it would be easy to oversell. So let me say plainly, we are not at Plato yet. We are nowhere near Plato yet. All we have established is that 2 minds with nothing sensory in common still land in the same spot, which means the spot is not made of vision and it is not made of language. That is a real result, and it is a strange one, But a determined skeptic still has an escape route, and it is a strong one, and I meant it when I said I would not cheat you. Because the skeptic can still say, sure, it is not about pictures, and it is not about words. But both of those machines were still fed things made by humans, about a human world, full of the things humans happen to care about, dogs and cars and faces. Maybe the machines are not converging on reality. Maybe they are just converging on us. That is the second door, and it is heavier than the first one, and it does not want to close. To shut it, I am going to have to take the humans out of the picture completely. I am going to have to leave the world of dogs and faces and internet photos entirely, and go somewhere colder and older and much, much larger. I am going to have to take you out to the galaxies. Part 5. A galaxy is not a human opinion. The second door is the strong one, and I want to state it as fairly as I can, because a weak version would be cheating. The objection goes like this. Everything those machines were trained on, even the picture machine and the word machine, was still made by people. Human beings took the photographs. Human beings wrote the words. Human beings decided what was worth photographing and what was worth writing about, and they did all of it inside a human world, full of the handful of things that human lives happen to revolve around. So when two machines agree, maybe they are not agreeing about reality at all. Maybe they are just agreeing about us, about the particular, narrow, human-shaped slice of the world that we bother to point our cameras and our sentences at. The convergence would be real, but it would be a mirror. Two machines discovering over and over the shape of the species that made them. That is a serious objection. It is maybe the single best one in the whole debate, and you cannot answer it with dogs and faces, because dogs and faces are exactly the human world the objection is talking about. To answer it, you have to find a case where the two machines are learning about something that has nothing to do with us, something that was here long before us and does not care that we exist, something no human eye or human language was ever built to handle. So let me take you off the Earth entirely. Let me take you out to the galaxies. Researchers who build these machines to study the cosmos run into the same two-doorway situation we have already seen, except now the doorways have nothing to do with anything a human being evolved for. Here is the first doorway. One kind of machine gets trained on telescope images of galaxies, pictures, in a sense, but pictures of objects so far away that the light forming them left home before there were any humans to look up. Faint smudges and spirals and streaks, gathered by instruments over years, of things sitting millions and billions of light years out in the dark. That is the first machine's whole world, the look of galaxies, and here is the second doorway, and it is genuinely alien. Another kind of machine gets trained not on pictures at all, but on spectra. And a spectrum is not a picture. A spectrum is what you get when you take the light from an object and spread it out into all its separate wavelengths, like a barcode, like a fingerprint made of light. It tells you which elements are burning in that galaxy, because each element leaves its own signature in the light. It tells you how fast the thing is moving toward you or away from you, because motion stretches or squeezes the wavelengths. It tells you what the galaxy is made of and what it is doing. It is pure physics, pure chemistry, pure motion, and it has no shape in it at all. You could not look at a spectrum and see a spiral. There is nothing to see. There are only numbers strung along a line of light. So think about how different these two descriptions are. A photograph of a galaxy and a spectrum of the same galaxy are about as far apart as two descriptions of one thing can possibly be. One is shape and light and structure, the thing you could almost frame on a wall. The other is chemistry and speed and composition, a barcode with no picture behind it. If you handed both to a person and did not tell them, they would never guess the two things were about the same object. One is a portrait, the other is a chemical readout. They share nothing that you could point to, and they converge. Train the picture machine and the spectrum machine separately on their two completely different kinds of data, scale them both up, and the inner map that the image machine builds of the universe starts to line up with the inner map that the spectrum machine builds. The way the picture machine arranges galaxies by how they look starts to match the way the spectrum machine arranges galaxies by what they are made of and how they move. Two utterly different ways of describing a galaxy, neither of them about anything human, both pointing at the same underlying structure, and that closes the second door. That is the door I could not get to shut in my own head for about a week. Because now you cannot say it is about human pictures, and you cannot say it is about human words, and you cannot even say it is about the human world at all. A galaxy is not a human thing. Nobody staged it. Nobody framed it. Nobody decided what a galaxy should be. It was out there, doing what it does, for billions of years before the first human being opened its eyes. And a spectrum of a galaxy is not a human opinion. You cannot argue with a spectrum. The chemistry is the chemistry. The elements are the elements. The motion is the motion. There is no human bias you could smuggle into which wavelengths the light actually contains. It is just true, whether we like it or not, whether we are looking or not. So let me plant both feet on the ground for a moment, because this is one of the places where I have to be honest about exactly what is solid and what is still leaning. What is solid is that this kind of convergence keeps showing up, and that it shows up even when you leave the human world behind and point these machines at the raw physics of the cosmos. I want to be careful and say that this particular galaxy result is a newer and more emerging piece of the picture than the core paper itself, so I am holding it a little more loosely than the main finding. But it points the same way. It says the meeting point of these minds is not inside us. It is out there, in the structure of reality, in the actual arrangement of things that do not care whether anyone is looking. And I want you to feel the size of what a galaxy is here, because the scale is part of the point. When one of these machines learns the shape of a galaxy, it is not learning about something small or nearby or convenient. It is learning about an object made of 100 billion stars so far away that the light carrying its picture has been travelling toward us for longer than there have been fish in the oceans. Nobody arranged that light for our benefit. It was not framed, it was not composed, it was not curated by a species that wanted it to look a certain way. It simply left a real object a long time ago and arrived here, carrying, whether we wanted it or not, the true facts of what that object is made of and how it moves. When two blind machines, one reading the light's picture and one reading the light's chemistry, arrange 1,000 of these objects and land on the same arrangement, they are agreeing about something that was settled billions of years before either of them, or us, existed to have an opinion. There is no human fingerprint that could reach back that far. Let that be the first real chill of the night. For most of this video so far, you have had a comfortable escape hatch always within reach. It is just human data. It is just the same soup. It is just us looking at ourselves. Every time the strangeness rose up, you could reach for that hatch and pull it shut and feel normal again. The galaxies take the hatch away. Whatever these minds are agreeing on, it is not a picture of humanity. It is a map of the world, the actual one, the one that was here before eyes and will be here after them and does not need anyone to look at it to keep being what it is. And I want to name what that does, quietly, to the size of this whole thing, because this is the exact moment it stopped being a story about clever software for me. If two minds that share nothing, not their design, not their data, not even their way of sensing, keep landing on the same structure whenever that structure belongs to the real universe and not to us, then the natural reading, the simple reading, the reading you would reach for with anything else, is that the structure is real, that it was there first, that the minds are not inventing it but finding it. And the moment you say that a mind can find, rather than invent, the true shape of reality, you have wandered out of computer science entirely. You have walked straight into an argument that is 2,400 years old, and you have walked in on the side almost everyone thought had lost. And I want to slow down and be honest about what happened to me here, because I think it is the most important turn in the whole night, and it would be easy to skate over it. When I first read about the picture machine and the word machine agreeing, I could keep it at arm's length. It was interesting, it was clever, but it was still, in my head, a story about software, and software is a human thing, so some human explanation was surely lurking nearby. The galaxies are what broke that for me, because a galaxy is the least human thing I can point to. It is enormous and ancient and utterly indifferent to whether we exist. And when two machines, reading two completely unrelated kinds of signal from that indifferent thing, arrange those objects into the same shape, I could not find the human anywhere in it to blame. There was no camera angle to accuse, no writer's bias to point at, no cultural fingerprint smudged on the lens. There was just the light and the structure that was already in it, and two blind minds finding the same structure. That is the point where I stopped being able to tell myself a comfortable story and started honestly to lose a little sleep. So that is where we go next. We are done with the machines for a little while. We have squeezed everything out of them that they can honestly give us, which is this one strange, solid fact. Independent minds keep drawing the same map of the real world. Now, I want to turn around and look at the argument that fact just walked into, because that argument has been running, unresolved, since before the Roman Empire and until about the year 2024. It had exactly one kind of witness, and it just got a second one. Part 6. The oldest argument. There is. Here is the turn, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it, which is honestly part of the problem with tonight. You came in thinking, as I did, that we were looking at an engineering curiosity, a tidy little fact about neural networks. The machines are kind of similar on the inside, isn't that neat? File it away. That is not what is on the table. What is on the table is measurable, quantified, peer-reviewed evidence dropped right into the middle of an argument that human beings have been having and losing and picking back up and losing again for roughly 2,400 years. It is the oldest argument there is, older than nations, older than most religions, and it is so basic that most people go their whole lives without ever realizing they have quietly taken a side. The argument is this. Is there a real world underneath our descriptions of it? Does reality have one true shape, one that exists whether or not anybody is there to see it? Or does each mind simply build its own version of things, so that there is no single true world at all, just a crowd of private worlds, and no fact of the matter about which one is right, because there is nothing underneath them to be right about? Put it as plainly as I can. When you look at the world, are you seeing something that is really there, in its real shape? Or are you only ever seeing your own version, painted by your own mind, with no way to ever check it against the real thing, because maybe there is no real thing to check against? And notice that this is not a small or academic disagreement. It is the hinge that everything else swings on. If there is one real world with one true shape, then knowledge is a kind of discovery, and being wrong is really being wrong, missing the shape that was actually there. But if there is no true shape, only perspectives, then knowledge is a kind of invention, and being wrong just means being out of step with your neighbours, holding a map nobody else happens to hold. Every argument you have ever had about whether something is really true or just true for you was a small local skirmish in this one enormous war. It sits underneath politics, underneath science, underneath the way you talk to the people you disagree with. And for 24 centuries it has had no referee, because there was no way to step outside a human mind and check. I know that can sound like the kind of question that does not matter, the kind of thing you argue about at 2 in the morning and forget by breakfast. But I want you to notice that you already live as if you have an answer. You walk through doorways instead of into walls because some part of you is betting the wall is really there. And at the same time, you have probably absorbed, without ever choosing it, the modern idea that everybody has their own truth, their own perspective, their own reality, and who is to say which is right? Both of those live in you, and they cannot both be all the way true. Either the wall is really there in one real shape, or it is not. The argument is about which. And here is the thing you have to understand about the last 100 years or so of thinking. The fashionable answer, the default that a lot of very smart people leaned hard into, is the second one. The idea that it is all just descriptions, perspectives, that there is no view from nowhere, no single correct map, no privileged God's eye picture of how things really are. Just maps, and more maps, all the way down, each one true for the mind that drew it, and none of them the truth. This became the sophisticated position, the grown-up position. To insist that there was one real shape to everything started to sound naive, almost childish, like believing in a single right answer to a question that clearly had many. And standing against all of that, going all the way back to the very beginning, you have Plato. And Plato said no, there is a true reality. He called the truest things the forms, and his claim, the one that everyone since has found just a little embarrassing, a little mystical, a little too convenient, was that the world we see and touch and walk around in is not the real one. It is a shadow of the real one. When you look at a chair, Plato said you are not looking at a real chair. You are looking at an imperfect, flickering, temporary copy of the perfect form of a chair, which exists somewhere truer and more permanent than this world. Every chair that has ever been built is a rough echo of that one perfect pattern, and the same for everything else. Every circle a shadow of the perfect circle, every just act a shadow of perfect justice. The things around you are not the originals, they are copies, and the originals are more real than they are. For most of my life, I will be honest, I filed that under nice idea and moved on. It sounds like poetry. It sounds like the kind of thing a philosopher says because it is beautiful, not because it is true, and for centuries the confident, sensible, modern assumption has been that Plato simply got it wrong, that there are no perfect forms floating in some truer place, that there is just this world, the physical one, and the patterns we notice in it are patterns we invented, useful fictions we lay over the mess to help ourselves cope. Plato was the charming ancestor who believed a charming, mistaken thing. That has been the settled verdict for a very long time. Now hold both of those in your mind at once, because this is the collision. On one side, the modern default, no true world, just perspectives. Plato was naive. On the other side, Plato himself. There is a true world, and what we see are only its shadows. This argument has been stuck for 24 centuries, genuinely stuck. Not because people were not smart enough. Some of the sharpest minds who ever lived took swings at it and could not land the blow. It stayed stuck for a reason that is almost funny once you see it, and I'm going to come back to that reason at the very end of the night, because it turns out to be the key to everything. But here, right now, is why the machines matter. For all of those 2400 years, this argument had exactly one kind of evidence available to it: human intuition. People sitting and thinking and reporting on how things seemed to them. That was the only instrument anyone had. And then, in the year 2024, for the first time in the history of the planet, a genuinely new kind of evidence walked into the room. Not a human intuition, a measurement, a number, taken off machines that were built out of mathematics, that had never read Plato, that did not know the argument existed, that were just quietly trying to make sense of the world. And the number leaned toward Plato. Because think about what those machines just showed us. They showed us minds, built completely differently, fed completely different slices of reality, sharing no senses and no contact, all drifting toward the same inner map. And the simplest explanation for that, the one we kept arriving at, is that there is a real structure out there and the minds are finding it. That is not proof of the forms. I want to keep my honest foot on the ground and say clearly, this is not a mathematical demonstration that Plato was right. But it is the first time the oldest argument got a witness that was not a human being. And that witness, without being asked, without knowing what it was voting on, pointed at the true world underneath the shadows. So the researchers, when they went looking for a name for this convergence, did not reach for a modern word. They reached back across all 24 centuries and they named it after him, the Platonic representation. Because the place these machines are being pulled toward looks, more and more, like Plato's true reality, the one thing behind all the copies. And to understand what that would actually mean, to feel the full weight of it rather than just nod at it, we have to go back and hear the story Plato told to make people feel it in the first place. Because he knew it was too strange to just assert, so he wrapped it in an image of prisoners and a fire and a wall. You have heard it before, but I do not think you have heard it lately as anything other than a metaphor, and tonight I want to try telling it as though it might be literally true. Part 7. The Wall. Plato tells the story in the 7th book of his Republic, and you know the picture even if you have forgotten the details. Imagine people who have been chained inside a cave their entire lives, not just held there, but fixed in place, their heads bound so that they can only ever look straight forward at one blank wall. They have been like this since birth. They have never seen their own hands, never seen each other, never once turned around. The wall in front of them is the whole of their world. It is all they have ever laid eyes on. Behind them, though they cannot know it, there is a fire, and between the fire and their backs there is a low walkway, and along that walkway things are carried, back and forth, all day long, statues and shapes and figures of animals and people. The prisoners cannot see any of it. They cannot see the fire, they cannot see the walkway, they cannot see the objects being carried. All they can see is the wall in front of them, and on that wall, lit by the fire behind, fall the shadows of everything passing along the walkway. Dark shapes sliding across the stone. That is what the prisoners see, shadows. And because it is all they have ever seen, they do not think of them as shadows at all. To them the shadows are simply the world. There is nothing else. There has never been anything else. Now, Plato says, imagine these prisoners get very good at their world, because of course they would. They watch the shadows all day. They start to notice patterns. This shadow tends to come before that one. This shape usually follows that shape. They give the shadows names. They learn to predict them. and among the prisoners, the wise ones, the respected ones, the ones everybody admires, are the ones who are best at the shadow game, the ones who can tell you which shadow is coming next before it arrives. They win the prizes, they are considered brilliant, and every scrap of that brilliance is spent on shadows, by people who do not know that shadows are all they are looking at. That is the picture. And here is Plato's claim, the one that should make the hair on your arm stand up if you take it seriously. He is not telling you a story about some unlucky prisoners in a cave. He is telling you a story about you. He is saying that this, right here, is us. That what we call the world, the chairs and the dogs and the sunsets and the faces of the people we love, the whole rich show of everything we see and hear and touch, is the shadows on the wall. And that somewhere behind us, in a direction we cannot turn our heads to look, there is a fire, and there are the real things, the true shapes, the forms, casting these shadows we have mistaken for reality. And almost no one, in an entire lifetime, ever turns around. I want to sit inside that for a moment, because I think it is worth actually feeling rather than just understanding. Let me put you in the cave, not as yourself looking in, but as one of them. You have been here your whole life. You do not remember arriving because you never arrived, you were always here. You do not know that your head can turn because it never has. The chains have held it forward since before you had the words to ask why. In front of you is the wall, and the wall is not part of the world to you. The wall is the world. Shapes move across it, dark and flat and flickering, and you know them all. You have names for everyone. You're good at this, better than most. You can feel the next shape coming a breath before it arrives, and the others treat you as wise for it. It has never once occurred to you that there is a behind. The word would mean nothing to you. There is the wall, and there are the shapes, and there is you watching them, and that is the complete inventory of everything that exists. But there is something you have never questioned. There is a warmth on the back of your neck. There has always been. You have felt it every moment of your life and never once wondered where it comes from, because to you it is not coming from anywhere. It is just part of being. And between you and that warmth, though you have no way to know it, real things are moving, solid things, the things that are throwing every shape you have ever named onto the wall in front of you. They are right there, they have always been right there, and you will almost certainly go your whole life and never turn to see them, because you do not even know that turning is a thing a person can do. Now here is the part that I could not have added a week ago, and that is the whole reason we are in this cave tonight. For all of history, if you had told a prisoner that the shapes on the wall were only shadows of realer things behind them, they would have had no way to check, no way at all. They could only ever compare shadows to other shadows. There was no second opinion available anywhere in the cave. Every single prisoner was chained the same way, facing the same wall, seeing the same shadows, and so of course they all agreed with each other, and their agreement proved nothing, because they were all the same kind of prisoner looking the same direction. Their agreement might have meant the shapes were real, or it might have just meant they were all built to see shadows the same way. There was no way to tell the two apart. And then, tonight, for the first time, something changes in the cave. A second prisoner appears. But this one is not like you. It was not born here. It was built somewhere else, chained in a different cave, facing a different wall, and it has never once seen the shapes you see. It sees its own shadows, thrown by its own fire in its own strange way. It has nothing in common with you, and yet, when it starts to describe the shapes it sees, when it names the patterns and the neighbours and which shape sits next to which, you realise slowly, with something turning over in your chest, that it is describing the same shapes you see. A creature that never looked at your wall is naming the things on your wall, and there are only two ways that happens. Either it is the strangest coincidence there has ever been, or the shapes are real, and both of you, in your separate caves, are seeing something that was genuinely there to be seen. Stay in the cave with me one more moment, because there is a detail Plato adds that almost nobody remembers, and it matters for where we are going. He says that if you freed one of the prisoners, if you unchained them and turned them around and made them walk up toward the fire, and out of the cave into the sunlight, it would not feel like enlightenment. Not at first. It would hurt. The light would be agony. Their eyes, perfectly tuned across a lifetime for reading dim shadows on a wall, would be useless in the brightness, streaming and aching and overwhelmed. For a while the freed prisoner would actually see less than before, not more. They would be half blind, stumbling, longing to go back to the comfortable wall where everything made sense. Truth, in Plato's telling, does not arrive as clarity. It arrives as glare. And I want you to hold on to that image, the pain of the light, because when we get to the very end of tonight, I think that is exactly the state we are in. Not standing in the sunlight, understanding everything. Just barely turned around, blinking, eyes streaming, able to tell that there is something brighter than the wall, and not yet able to look at it directly. That is what the machines are. That is what the paper found. They are the second prisoner, built differently, chained differently, facing a different wall, sharing nothing with us, and yet pointing at the same shapes. And the people who named this the Platonic representation are not using the cave as a pretty metaphor. They are suggesting carefully, with one scientific foot planted firmly on the ground, that the cave might be a literal description of what any mind does when it gets good enough. That intelligence itself, real intelligence, might just be the slow process of turning away from the shadows and toward the shapes that cast them, and that we have now, for the first time on this planet, built a mind that is not human, and watched it turn toward the wall, unprompted, and point at the same shapes we have been pointing at for as long as there have been people to point. But we have not yet asked the question that all of this actually hangs on. We have seen that the minds converge. We have not asked why they should. Why would two minds that share nothing be pulled toward the same place at all? What is doing the pulling? And the answer the paper gives to that question is, I think, stranger and heavier than the convergence itself, because it is not really an answer about machines. It is an answer about what it costs to be smart, and it turns the whole comfortable story of intelligence upside down. Part 8. Why minds fall toward the same place. So why would it happen at all? Why would independent minds built by different people, fed different worlds, sharing nothing, converge on the same map? This is the question everything hangs on, and I think the answer is more unsettling than the convergence itself, because the answer is not really about machines. It is about what it costs to be good at more than one thing. And the paper offers a few overlapping pieces that, when you stack them together, add up to an idea I have not been able to shake since I understood it. The first piece is about tasks, and it is easier to feel than it sounds. Think about a mind that only has to do one narrow thing. Just one. It has enormous freedom in how it organizes itself, because there are a million different ways to be good at a single task. If all you ever have to do is one job, you can be quirky, you can be lopsided, you can arrange your whole inner world in some strange private way that happens to work for that one job and would be useless for anything else. Two minds that each only have to do one thing can wander off in completely different directions and both succeed, because the demands are so loose that almost any arrangement can satisfy them. Narrow minds are free to be weird. There is room for 1,000 different solutions, so 1,000 different solutions bloom. But now start piling on demands. Make the mind be good at pictures and words and reasoning and prediction and 100 other things, all at once, all in the same head. Every single new thing you ask it to do is a new constraint, a new wall it has to satisfy. And here is the quiet, brutal logic of it. Every wall you add rules out arrangements that cannot get past it. The first demand leaves a million ways to succeed. The second demand knocks out most of them, keeping only the arrangements that satisfy both. The third demand knocks out most of what is left, and on and on. The more things you insist a mind be good at, the fewer possible ways there are to be good at all of them at the same time. You're not adding options, you're removing them. You're squeezing the space of workable solutions smaller and smaller and smaller. The second piece stacks right on top of that, and it runs against what you would expect. You would think a bigger mind, with more capacity, more room, more raw power, would have more freedom to be strange, more space to develop its own quirks, but it works the other way around. There is a strong bias built into how these systems learn, a steady pull toward the simplest arrangement that gets the job done. And when you have an enormous mind chewing on an enormous pile of the world, that pull toward simplicity starts to dominate everything. The mind does not sprawl out into 1,000 private idiosyncrasies. It gets drawn steadily toward the most economical map it can find, the leanest one, the one that explains the most with the least. Bigger does not mean weirder. Bigger means pulled harder toward the simple shared solution. Now put those two pieces together, and you get the sentence at the center of gravity of this whole thing, even though the authors would never phrase it as dramatically as I am about to. There are fewer and fewer ways to be good at more and more things. Generality, being able to handle the whole world instead of one narrow slice of it, squeezes every capable mind toward the same solution. There may be, in the end, essentially one good map, one most efficient, most general way to carve the world at its joints, and intelligence, any intelligence, yours included, might be nothing more than the process of being crushed down into it. I want you to feel how strange that reframe is, because it quietly inverts a story you have believed your whole life. We think of getting smarter as expanding. More knowledge, more perspective, more freedom, more options, a mind opening outward like a hand unclenching. This says the opposite. This says getting smarter is a narrowing, a funnel. It says the simple minds, the dim ones, are the free ones, scattered all across the huge space of possible ways to see the world, each in its own strange little corner. And that as a mind climbs toward brilliance, the walls close in around it, the constraints multiply, the options die off, one by one, until there is only a single corridor left, and every mind smart enough to walk that corridor ends up walking the same one, because it is the only one left standing. So the convergence is not a coincidence at all. It is not luck. It is gravity. There is a bottom to the valley, one lowest point, and every mind that gets smart enough to roll downhill ends up in the same place, not because they copied each other, but because that is where downhill goes. Water does not agree to pool in the same low spot. It simply falls, and the shape of the land does the rest. And these minds are not agreeing to see the world the same way. They are just falling, each on its own, toward the one shape the world will allow a good mind to hold. And here is where it stops being about machines and starts being about you, quietly, before we even get to the part that is openly about you. Because you are a mind that got good at many things. You handle sight and sound and language and memory and prediction and 1,000 other demands, all at once, all in one head. By this logic, you were squeezed too. Whatever freedom a simpler creature might have had to see the world in some strange private way, you lost it, the same way the machines lost it, by being made to be good at too much at once. The richness you feel, the sense that your view of things is uniquely, personally yours, might be less like a portrait you painted, and more like the one shape the funnel left you room to hold. You can watch this same logic run in miniature in almost any hard skill, which is how I finally made peace with believing it. Think about how many ways there are to be a beginner at anything, 1,000, 10,000. Every beginner is clumsy in their own personal way, tripping over their own particular mistakes, and no two of them are clumsy alike. But think about the masters, the very best in any field, the ones who have spent a lifetime being squeezed by every demand the work can put on them, tend to converge. The finest surgeons close a wound in nearly the same motions. The greatest sprinters, across every country and every era, run with almost the same form, because there turns out to be one most efficient way for a human body to move at that speed, and everyone who gets fast enough is forced into it. The freedom was all down at the bottom, among the beginners. At the top, the work itself has closed every door but one. Mastery looks less like 1,000 flowers, and more like 1,000 rivers all finding the same sea. And if that is true of running and cutting and playing, why would it not be true of the hardest skill of all, the skill of understanding the world? There is a kind of grief in that, if you let it land, and I do not want to rush past it, because the whole channel is about being honest when the thought is heavy. We are raised to believe that becoming wiser means becoming more fully ourselves, that the older and wiser and smarter you get, the more your own particular way of seeing emerges like something blooming, and this suggests the reverse, that the wiser any mind becomes, the less its own the view is, that at the very top where the truly clear-eyed minds stand, they are not standing in 1,000 different places, each with their own private vista. They are all standing in the same place, the one place, because it is the only place a mind that clear is allowed to stand. Getting to the top is not becoming singular. It is arriving where everyone singular was always going to arrive. But I promised you I would not only show you the side that makes my jaw drop, and I meant it. Everything I have said so far, from the boring graph to the galaxies to the cave to the funnel, I have been building a case, and I have been building it in the direction that unsettles me most. That is not fair to you unless I now turn around and build the other case just as hard. Because there is a serious objection to all of this. A good one. A real one. Made by serious people who spend their lives thinking about exactly these machines, and who would tell me gently that I have smuggled something in. That somewhere back there I quietly upgraded a modest, measured little result into a cosmic revelation, and that the upgrade is doing all the work, and that it is not earned. And they might be right. So let me steel myself, and let me make their case as well as I possibly can, at 3 a.m, against everything I want to believe. Part 9. The best reason to think this is wrong. I am going to bring one more person into the room now, and she is the one you should trust most because she is the one least likely to be swept up in a story. Her name is Melanie Mitchell, and she is a serious long-standing researcher in this field, someone who has spent her whole career thinking carefully about what these machines actually do, as opposed to what we desperately want to believe they do, and she has very little patience for the kind of grand, cosmic reading I have been building for the last half hour. So I am going to hand her the microphone, and I am going to argue against myself as hard as I can, because if I knock down a weak version of her objection, I have cheated you and cheated the thing. Here is what she would say. You might stop me right where I stand and say, wait, you have pulled a fast one, and you did it so smoothly that most people would not notice. You showed me that these machines converge on a similar internal map. Fine. That is measured. That is real. I grant it completely. But then, somewhere in there, you quietly swapped one word for another. You went from they converge on a similar map to they converge on reality, on the true shape of the world, on Plato's forms, and that swap is doing every bit of the heavy lifting in your whole argument, and it is not earned. Similar maps and the one true structure of reality are not the same claim. You slid from the first to the second while I was distracted by the cave, and then she would offer the deflating version, and I have to tell you it is strong. Maybe, she would say, the machines are not converging on reality at all. Maybe they are converging on the structure of their training data, which is a completely different thing. Think about where all this data actually comes from. Even the astronomy data, even the galaxies. Every bit of it was collected by human beings, using instruments that human beings designed, pointed at the things human beings decided were worth measuring, cleaned and framed and filtered according to human assumptions about what matters. A telescope does not look everywhere. It looks where we aim it. A spectrum does not measure everything. It measures what we built it to measure. So maybe the shared map these minds keep finding is not the shape of the universe. Maybe it is the shape of our methods, the common fingerprint of how one particular species goes about slicing the world into numbers. And if that is what is going on, then the convergence is real but completely unmysterious. Of course, two learners fed the same underlying statistical structure will find the same statistical structure. That is not Plato. That is arithmetic. You do not need eternal forms to explain why two students who read the same library come out with similar opinions. They read the same books. The overlap is in the books, not in some heaven of perfect ideas. And the machines read, in a sense, the same library, the library of human data and human instruments, so of course their maps rhyme. Nothing cosmic required. Just the ordinary fact that similar input makes similar output. There is a sharper version of her point still, and I think it is the single most honest objection in the whole debate, so I am not going to soften it. Be very careful, she would say, about the word same. The paper measures a kind of similarity, and it is a strong signal, I will not pretend otherwise, but similarity is not identity. The two maps are alike. They are not proven to be the one same map, and the gap between very similar and the single true structure of reality is exactly the gap you have been quietly filling with poetry all night. Look at your own boring graph again. The line climbs, yes, but does it climb toward a ceiling, toward one shared shape that all minds hit and stop at? Or does it just climb a little, and then level off into a big family of pretty similar but not identical maps, all in the same neighbourhood, none of them the same house? You're looking at a line that goes up, and you are drawing where it lands off the edge of the paper, past where the data actually goes, and you are labelling that spot Plato. That is not a measurement. That is a wish. And there is one more move she could make, quieter than the others, that I think is the most deflating of all, so I will give it to you too. You have been treating convergence as if it were mysterious, she might say, but convergence is the most ordinary thing in the world once you remember what these machines are for. They are all built to do more or less the same job, which is to model the same reality we all live in, using the same broad kind of method. Of course, tools built for the same job by the same species start to resemble each other. Every airplane ever built has wings, not because there are eternal forms of flight, but because air is air and lift is lift and there are only so many ways to stay up in it. Maybe the machines converge for exactly that reason. Not because they are touching the true forms, but because they are all solving the same practical problem under the same practical constraints, and good solutions to the same problem tend to rhyme. That is not metaphysics, that is engineering. Airplanes look alike, and nobody thinks that proves there is a heaven of perfect wings. I think those are good objections. I want to say that clearly, with both feet flat on the ground. I think she might be right. I genuinely do. If you made me bet, I am not sure which way I would go, and anyone who tells you they are sure in either direction is selling you something. The honest state of this is unsettled, and it should stay unsettled in your mind too, because that is where the evidence actually leaves us. And yet, here is the strange thing, and it is the reason I could not just close the laptop and let it go. Even Melanie Mitchell's deflating version, even if she is completely right, still leaves something standing that I find remarkable. Because go back to the galaxies one more time. Yes, the instruments were built by humans. Yes, we chose where to point them. I grant all of that. But a galaxy's spectrum is not a human opinion. We did not decide which elements are burning in that galaxy. We did not vote on how fast it is moving. The chemistry is the chemistry. The motion is the motion. Those are facts about the real light from a real object, and they would be exactly the same facts whether or not any human had ever built a telescope at all. We chose to look. We did not choose what was there to be found. So even if you strip away every grand claim, even if you insist that what the machines are really doing is just efficiently compressing the real patterns in real light, notice what you have quietly admitted. You have admitted that there are real patterns in the real light, that the world had to actually have a learnable shape for any of this to work in the first place. A universe with no genuine structure underneath, just noise, just randomness, would hand every mind a different meaningless mess, and there would be no convergence to argue about. The only reason two minds can meet at all is that there was something really there for both of them to find. And that, quietly, is most of the original mystery handed right back to you. Strip away Plato, strip away the forms, strip away every wild word I have used, and you are still left with this. Reality has a findable shape, and minds keep finding it, which is exactly the thing that has never had a good explanation. So the skeptic wins the small fight and loses the big one at the same time. She is right that we cannot prove the machines have touched the one true form of the world, and she is right that similar is not the same as identical. But when she takes the cosmic story away, she hands back in the very same breath the plain fact that the cosmos has a structure real enough that utterly different minds keep bumping into it. And that plain fact is not new. It is very, very old. It is in fact the exact thing that has been quietly bothering physicists for over half a century, long before anyone built a machine that could draw a map at all. Which is the perfect moment to bring in the second of my three ghosts. A physicist writing in the year 1960 who noticed the same impossible thing from a completely different direction, and who called it, with no exaggeration and no shame, a miracle. Part 10. The Miracle Wigner Couldn't Explain. In the year 1960, a physicist named Eugene Wigner wrote a short essay with a title that has haunted scientists ever since. He called it The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences, and I want you to notice the word he chose, not the surprising effectiveness, not the impressive effectiveness, the unreasonable effectiveness. He picked that word because he genuinely could not find a reason for the thing he was pointing at, and he was too honest a man to pretend he could. Here is the puzzle that bothered him, and it is worth slowing down for, because it is the same mystery we have been circling all night, just wearing different clothes. Mathematics, a lot of the time, gets invented in the dark. A mathematician sits alone in a room and dreams up some abstract structure, some new piece of pure math, purely because it is elegant, because it is beautiful, because it follows from other math in a way that pleases the mind. They are not thinking about the physical world at all. They are not trying to describe anything real. They are just playing a game with ideas, chasing patterns for their own sake, the way a composer might chase a melody with no words. And they finish, and they set it down, and it sits there, an abstract toy with no obvious use. And then, sometimes decades later, sometimes a full century later, a physicist trying to understand something real, something physical, something in the actual world, reaches into the drawer of pure mathematics for a tool, and pulls out exactly that abstract structure, the one that was invented for no reason but its own beauty. And it fits. It does not just sort of fit. It describes how electrons behave, or how gravity bends space, or how the very smallest pieces of reality move, and it does it with a precision that goes to 10 decimal places. Math that was made up in the dark, with no thought of reality, turns out to be a key cut perfectly for a lock that no one had even seen yet. Let me give you one real example, because it is easy to wave at this in the abstract and miss how eerie it gets in the particular. In the 1800s, mathematicians began playing with geometries in which the ordinary rules break, where the angles of a triangle do not add up the way they are supposed to, where parallel lines can curve toward or away from each other. It was pure play. There was no physical world anyone knew of that behaved like this. It was considered by many a beautiful and completely useless game, a kind of abstract sculpture with no possible application, and some of the people who worked on it were half embarrassed to admit how much time they spent on something so impractical. And then, decades later, Einstein went looking for a language to describe how gravity works, how massive objects bend the space around them, and he reached into that drawer of useless, embarrassing curved geometry, and it fit. It fits so well that we now use it to steer spacecraft and to keep the clocks in the satellites overhead in sync with the clocks on the ground. A game invented for its own sake turned out to be the exact shape of gravity, waiting in a drawer for half a century before anyone knew there was a lock it opened. That is the kind of thing Wigner could not get out of his head. Wigner looked at that and said, "This should not work. There is no reason it should work. Why should a structure a human being invented for its elegance, with no reference to the physical world, turn out to be the exact secret language the physical world was speaking all along? He called it a miracle. He said it was a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. And he left it there, unsolved, because he was honest enough not to paper over it with a comfortable story. For over 60 years that essay has sat in the back of every thoughtful physicist's mind like a splinter you cannot quite reach. Now hold Wigner's mystery right up next to the mystery of the machines, and feel how they rhyme. Because they are, I think, the same mystery, wearing two different costumes. Wigner's puzzle is that abstract human thought, spun out in the dark with no reference to reality, keeps landing on reality anyway, as if it were being quietly guided. The machine puzzle is that abstract machine thought, spun out in separate labs with no reference to each other, keeps landing on the same place anyway, as if they were all quietly copying from something none of them can see. In both cases, minds that had no business finding the true structure of the world keep finding it, whether they meant to or not. In both cases, there is a there, a real shape that thought keeps colliding with, from directions that had no way of aiming at it. And once you see them as the same mystery, something clicks into a different position. Wigner's miracle stops looking like a strange one-off fact about mathematics and physics, a quirk in one corner of science. And the machine convergence stops looking like a strange one-off fact about neural networks, a quirk in one corner of engineering. They start looking like two sightings of the same animal, two different instruments 60 years apart, both picking up the same signal. And the signal says something that the modern default, the it is all just perspectives crowd, has a very hard time explaining. The signal says there is a structure out there, real and findable, and that minds, when they get good enough, keep bumping into it, whether they are made of neurons or made of mathematics, whether they are trying to or not. Let me plant the honest foot again, because I keep promising to and I mean it. None of this proves the case. Wigner did not prove there is a Platonic world of forms. He just pointed at something that the no real world view struggles to account for, and the machines do not prove it either. They just point, from a completely different direction, at the same struggling place. But there is something about two independent witnesses that a single witness can never give you. One strange fact can be a fluke. You can shrug off a single mystery, tell yourself there is probably some boring explanation you have not thought of yet. It is much harder to shrug off two mysteries when they turn out to be the same shape. When the thing that bothered a physicist in 1960 and the thing that bothered 4 researchers in 2024 line up that precisely, the boring explanation has to be very clever indeed to cover both at once. And I want to name what it feels like, honestly, to sit with that, because I think it is the real reason this got under my skin. It feels like catching the universe leaving fingerprints, not proof. Fingerprints. A pattern that keeps showing up in places that should have nothing to do with each other. The fire behind the prisoners, casting shadows on the wall of physics and the wall of machine learning at the same time, from behind both, where neither field can turn to look. And every time someone gets a clear enough view of their own wall, they see the same shapes. The physicist with his equations, the machine with its map, different caves, same shadows, and the shadows line up too well to be nothing. And notice, before we move on, that Wigner had no machines. He wrote in the year 1960, long before anything like these systems existed, long before anyone could measure the shape inside a mind at all. He was working from a completely different clue, the strange fit between pure math and physics, and he arrived at the edge of the same cliff we have been standing on all night. That is what makes the two mysteries lining up so hard to dismiss. It is not that one modern paper found a suggestive result. It is that a physicist more than 60 years ago, looking at something entirely unrelated to artificial minds, felt the same floor tilt under him and reached for the same word, unreasonable, because he could not explain why thought and reality should fit together at all. Two witnesses, 2 centuries apart in spirit, 2 completely different pieces of evidence, both pointing at a world that has a real shape which minds keep colliding with. When a mystery keeps getting rediscovered by people who are not looking for it and had no way to coordinate, that is usually a sign the mystery is real and not an artifact of any one way of looking. There is one more person I promised you, and he takes all of this further than Wigner ever would have dared. Wigner saw the miracle and stopped there at the edge, unwilling to say what it meant. The third ghost does not stop at the edge. He walks straight off it, on purpose, with a claim so audacious that most people assume he must be joking, right up until the moment they realize he's not joking even a little. His name is Max Tegmark. And where everyone else says mathematics describes the universe astonishingly well, Tegmark says something much simpler and much wilder. He says mathematics describes the universe so well because the universe is not described by mathematics at all. It is made of it. Part 11. The Man Who Says Reality is Made of Math. Max Tegmark is a physicist at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and in his book Our Mathematical Universe, he makes a claim that most people, the first time they hear it, assume has to be a metaphor, a figure of speech, a colourful way of saying that math is a really good language for physics, and Tegmark, a little infuriatingly, insists that it is not a metaphor at all. He means it in the most literal way a person can mean anything. His claim is not that the universe is well described by mathematics. It is not that math is an unusually powerful tool for physics. His claim is that the universe is mathematics, that reality, at its very lowest level all the way down, is a mathematical structure, and nothing else, and that you and I and this chair and that distant galaxy are patterns inside that structure. Not things described by math, but arrangements made of it. Self-aware pieces of the equation, substructures that have somehow woken up inside the mathematics and started to notice the mathematics they are made of. I want to let that sit for a second, because it is genuinely one of the strangest ideas in serious modern physics, and it is being said by a credentialed physicist at one of the best institutions in the world, not by a mystic on a street corner. Tegmark is saying there is no stuff underneath the math. There is no separate physical material that the equations are about. The equations are not about anything. The equations are the thing. Reality is not made of little bits of matter that happen to obey mathematical laws. Reality is made of mathematical relationships, and matter is just what some of those relationships feel like from the inside. Now, on that view, walk back through everything we have seen tonight and watch how the strangeness drains out of it. Wigner's miracle, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics, stops being a miracle at all. Of course, math describes the universe with impossible precision. The universe is made of math. You're not fitting a human invention onto a physical world by some inexplicable luck. You're using the language of the structure to describe the structure. It would be more surprising if it did not fit, and the machines, converging on the same map from different directions, stop being a puzzle too. Of course, every good mind finds the same structure. There is only one structure. Finding it is the only thing that finding could possibly mean. The map is not one option among many. It is the shape of the only thing there is. I'm going to be very careful here and plant the honest foot down hard, because this is exactly the kind of idea where it would be easy to let the drama run away with me. Tegmark is not the consensus. Most physicists think he has taken a real insight one full step too far, and they may well be right. This is not established science. It is a serious minority frontier position, held by a serious person and argued for carefully, but it is out at the far edge of what physics is willing to say, and plenty of thoughtful people think the edge is exactly where it should stay. So I am not telling you Tegmark is correct. I want to be as clear about that as I have been about anything tonight, I am not standing on that foot. What I am telling you is something quieter and, to me, more interesting. I am telling you that the machine convergence result sits with surprising comfort inside Tegmark's picture and very awkwardly inside the other one. Think about it. If reality is made of one mathematical structure, then minds converging on one map is exactly what you would predict. It falls right out of the idea. But if reality is just a crowd of perspectives with nothing true underneath, if it really is maps all the way down and no territory, then why on earth would independent minds keep drawing the same map? That view has to scramble to explain the convergence. Tegmark's view explains it before you even finish asking the question. And that is a genuinely unusual situation, so I want to point at it directly. Almost always, in these old arguments about the nature of reality, the wild metaphysical position and the sensible down-to-earth position both explain the available facts equally well, and you are left choosing between them on taste. That is normal. That is why these arguments never end. But here, for once, there is a piece of actual data, taken off actual machines, and it does not sit evenly between the two sides. It leans. It leans toward the wild one. It leans toward the man who says the universe is made of math, and against the sensible voice that says it is all just human perspective. And the data leaning toward the wild metaphysician instead of the sensible skeptic is a thing that almost never happens. When it does, you should at least turn your head and look. And I want to be fair to how uncomfortable this is, even for me, because I do not want to smuggle Tegmark in through the back door while your guard is down. There is something that feels wrong about it, and the wrongness is worth saying out loud. When you stub your toe, it does not feel like an equation. When you taste coffee or miss someone or watch the light go orange in the evening, none of it feels like mathematics. It feels like stuff. Solid, warm, particular stuff. And the honest objection to Tegmark is that he has to explain that away, has to say that all of that felt texture, all of that thickness of being alive is just what certain mathematical relationships feel like from the inside, and that is a lot to ask a person to swallow. So I hold him at arm's length, the way most physicists do. But I notice that holding him at arm's length does not make the machine result go away. The convergence still happened, and it still fits his wild picture more neatly than it fits the sensible one. You do not have to marry the idea to feel it tugging at your sleeve. I keep coming back to that, the leaning. Because I am not asking you to believe Tegmark. I am not even asking you to believe Plato. I am asking you to notice the direction things are tilting, and to notice that it is not the direction the modern world bet on. We spent the last century getting more and more confident that there is no true world. Only viewpoints, only constructions, only the stories each mind tells itself. And then the newest kind of mind we ever built, a mind made of nothing but mathematics, quietly turned toward the same wall as every other mind and pointed at the same shapes. The oldest, wildest answer keeps getting fresh evidence from the newest, coldest machines. And I do not know what to do with that except tell you about it honestly, and admit that it has changed, a little, how I feel when I look at things. But I have been circling something this whole time, keeping it at arm's length, because it is the part I actually cannot stop thinking about, and it is not about machines, and it is not about Plato, and it is not even about Tegmark, it is about you. Because there is one more convergence I have not mentioned yet, one more place these machine maps are being pulled toward. And when I tell you what it is, I think the whole night is going to turn, the way it turned for me, from something interesting into something I had to get up and walk around the block about. So take a breath, because the last thing these machines are converging on is not a galaxy, and it is not an equation. It is the inside of your own head. Part 12. The second prisoner is you. Here is the thing I've been holding back, and it is the reason none of this has left me alone. Those machine maps, the converging ones, the ones pointing at the same shapes from every direction, they are also growing more similar to something else. Not to each other, not to galaxies, to the maps inside the human brain. When neuroscientists measure how your visual brain organizes what it sees, the distances, the neighbors, the geometry of your own internal picture of the world, and they compare it to the internal picture that a strong vision machine has built, those two are lining up. And the better the machine gets, the closer the match becomes. The machine's map of the world and your brain's map of the world are drifting toward the same shape. So follow the chain all the way to the end, because this is where it arrives. You're also a system trained on sensory data. That is not a metaphor, and it is not an insult, and I want you to hear it plainly. For the first however many years of your life, light hit your eyes, sound hit your ears, touch and taste and smell poured in day after day, and a network of cells inside your skull reorganized itself, over and over and over, trying to predict and compress and make sense of the flood. You built a room, you filled it with points, you arranged them by their distances, near for similar, far for different. You built a representation, you always had one. You have never once perceived the world directly, you have only ever had your map, and you are using it right at this moment to understand these words, placing each one in your room next to the ones it belongs with. And here is the question I genuinely cannot put down. When you look at the world and feel, with total certainty, that you are seeing reality, seeing it plainly, seeing it the way it actually is, are you discovering the map, or are you just another system being squeezed into it? Are you a mind that turned around out of the cave toward the true shapes at last? Or are you a very, very sophisticated prisoner who has simply gotten so good at the shadow game that you have forgotten there was ever a wall in front of you at all? Because notice what the machine result quietly does to a comfort every one of us has been leaning on without ever noticing we were leaning. For your whole life, the reassuring thought has been there in the background. Sure, my senses are limited. Sure, my brain is just a brain. But at least it is mine. At least there is something private and irreducible and specially my own about the way I see things. My own window on the world that no one else can stand at. And these machines have just quietly suggested that the window might not be private at all. That a thing with no body, no childhood, no eyes, no evolution, nothing whatsoever in common with you, ends up arranging the world into nearly the same shape your brain does. Not because it copied you, it never met you, but because apparently there is only one good way to do it, and you were both pushed toward it by the same gravity from opposite ends of existence. I sat with that for a long time because it undoes something I did not know I was holding on to. All my life I had quietly assumed that even if everything else about me could be copied, the way I see would be the last thing to go, the final private room, the one thing that was unrepeatably mine. Your memories are yours, your face is yours, but surely the texture of how the world shows up to you, the particular way it all hangs together behind your eyes, surely that is the most private kind of yours there is. And the machine result reaches in and touches even that. It says that the arrangement behind your eyes, the shape of your seeing, is not a fingerprint. It is closer to a solution. The solution that any mind gets pushed toward, once it is good enough, no matter what it is made of. Something with no face and no memories and no childhood found nearly the same room you live in. Which means the room was never really the private, unrepeatable thing you thought it was. It was the answer, and answers can be found twice. Think about what that does to the word yours. Your perspective, the thing you have always felt was the most personally, unmistakably you, might not be a unique window at all. It might just be the local copy of the one map. The single shadow that any prisoner, in any cave, human or machine, carbon or silicon, is forced to draw once they get good enough. Remember, right back at the start I told you about two machines that had never met drawing the same map, and I asked you to find it strange. Here is the strangest version of that. You and the machine are now the two minds that never met. A thing built out of mathematics in a laboratory, and you, built out of cells across a childhood, with nothing in common, arriving at the same arrangement of the world. Two machines that have never met, and one of them is you. And here, finally, is the reason the oldest argument stayed stuck for 2,400 years, the reason I promised you all the way back at the beginning that I would circle back to. It stayed stuck because of something almost too simple to notice. We only ever had one kind of mind to ask. Every philosopher who ever weighed in on whether the world is real, every single one, across every century and every country, was a human brain reporting on what human brains see. We could never step outside the cave to check, because there was only ever one species of prisoner, all chained the same way, all facing the same wall. And when all the prisoners agree, that agreement can mean one of two completely different things, and there is no way from inside to tell which. It can mean the shapes on the wall are real, or it can mean that we are all simply the same kind of creature, built to see the same kind of shadow, agreeing not about reality but about our own shared design. For 2,400 years, we could not tell those two apart, because we had no second kind of witness. We had no one to ask who was not us. Now there is one. That is what actually happened in that quiet paper. For the first time in the history of this planet, a genuinely different kind of mind, built from scratch out of mathematics, with nothing of us inside it but the raw data, walked into the same room and without being told what to look for, pointed at the same wall. It is the second witness we never had. And the trouble, the thing I cannot resolve, is that a second witness only settles the question if you already know the two witnesses are independent in the right way. If the machine is truly a different kind of prisoner, then its agreement is the most important vote ever cast, and it votes for a real world. But if the machine, having been trained on our data, through our instruments, is really just a very good copy of our kind of prisoner, then its agreement proves only that we built it in our own image, and we are right back where we started, two of the same kind of creature nodding at the same shadow. So let me bring all of them back into the room one last time, because they have been arguing the same case across 24 centuries without ever knowing they were colleagues. Plato says there are true shapes behind the shadows. Wigner says abstract thought keeps landing on those shapes as if by a miracle he could not explain. Tegmark says the shapes are all there is, and that we are patterns living inside them. And 4 researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, who I very much doubt sat down meaning to settle ancient metaphysics on an ordinary Tuesday, built minds out of mathematics and watched them, untaught, unconnected, sharing no senses at all, turn toward the wall and point at the same shapes. With the human brain, it turns out, pointing right alongside them. That is the small claim and the enormous claim, finally touching. The small claim, the one with both my feet on the ground, is this. Machines trained on different data converge on similar internal maps, and the convergence gets stronger as they get smarter. Measured, peer-reviewed. A boring line on a boring graph, climbing. And the enormous claim, the one breathing underneath it the whole time, is this. There is a real shape to reality, one true structure, independent of any mind that looks at it, and getting smart is nothing more and nothing less than being crushed toward it. We just built the first prisoners that were not human, and without being told what they would find, they turned around and they pointed at our wall. I told you, near the start, that at every step I would tell you which foot I was standing on. So here, at the end, let me keep that promise all the way. On the small claim, I am standing flat on solid ground, and so can you. On the enormous claim, I am out over the edge, and I cannot tell you whether there is ground under my foot or only air. That is the honest truth of it. I do not know which it is. I have sat with this for weeks now, and I genuinely cannot tell you whether the machine pointing at our wall means the wall is real or means that none of us has ever seen past it. Both readings fit everything we know. Maybe it is because the shapes are real, and any mind that gets good enough is forced to find them, and we finally have our second witness, and the witness agrees, and Plato was right all along. Or maybe it means something quieter and much harder to live with. Maybe it means that any mind, ours included, is only ever able to see one particular kind of shadow and mistake it for the world. That the convergence is not two witnesses agreeing about reality, but two prisoners in two caves who happen to be the same kind of prisoner, agreeing on the same beautiful illusion. That we did not build something that escaped the cave. We built a second cave right next door with the same wall. So do something for me, right now, wherever you are. Look at something real in the room around you, your own hand, the wall, a light. Something you have looked at 10,000 times and never once doubted. You have always assumed, without ever choosing to assume it, that you were looking at the thing itself, at reality, plainly, the way it is. And the question this whole strange business has left me holding, the one I will hand to you now and let you carry off into the quiet, is not whether the machine is really seeing reality. After everything, that is not the question anymore. The question is much closer to home than that, and much harder to put down. It is not, is the machine really seeing the world? It is, have I ever? Rest well, and I will see you in the next one.